In my last video, I discussed the state of Destiny 2 at a very high level, giving an overview of everything currently going on in the game. This week, however, we're getting a little deeper into it. A ton of you guys voted in the poll I put up with the last video, and the overwhelming victory went to PvE activities in Destiny, specifically rituals and seasonals. And there's no doubt in my mind why you wanted me to talk about it first. Destiny has a number of activities available at any given time. Some rotate, some are built for endgame players, some are for PvP fans. But the core of Destiny has always been the ritual activities such as Vanguard Ops and the current seasonal activity offerings. When you open the game, you are most likely going to queue into one of these. With these core activities being the primary focus for players and what they're expected to play, they should be timeless, infinitely replayable, give a decent amount of rewards, and just be fun to play. But that's not exactly what we've got right now. There's a lot of good and also a lot of bad with these activities, and so today, let's figure out what exactly is going on with them and maybe how we can make them a little bit better. Hey everyone, I'm Rizeki and welcome to my analysis of core PvE activities in Destiny 2. For anyone new to the channel, this is the second video in my series about the state of Destiny 2. If you happen to miss the first video, be sure to check it out using the link on screen or in the video description. It'll give you a nice overview of everything we're going to be talking about in this series. And if you want to see each video in the series as they're released, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you get notified. Last but not least, make sure to stick around until the very end of the video to find out how you can vote for the next topic for the next video. If it wasn't too clear in the intro, this video is going to be all about core PvE activities, specifically Vanguard Ops and seasonal activities. To stay as up to date as I can, I'll also be mostly talking about seasonal activities currently available in the game. As of writing this video, we have episode Echoes and episode Revenant activities available. I'll be mentioning a couple past activities for comparison's sake, but I'll try to make it brief when I do. Okay, so what is going on with our core PvE activities? I think a lot of players are on a similar wavelength to me here. These activities are just not exciting. We load into Vanguard Ops maybe once a week or so for our Pathfinder quests, play a couple strikes, and then move on. We play the seasonal activities a couple times for the seasonal quest, maybe a few times outside of that for a specific weapon drop or red borders, and then we quit. There's something about these activities that just isn't gripping players for the most part. But before we get to what could use some fixing, we should probably talk about what these activities do well and what probably shouldn't be changed. Our core activities in Destiny have a couple goals, which I think they have actually achieved. For one, these activities are typically low difficulty, are fast to complete, and provide decent loot upon completion. The core activities are set up in a way that provides the lowest barrier to entry for anyone. You just hop on, play a couple, and then log off. The most important benefit of the core activities is to provide a starting place for any player, especially new lights. Vanguard Ops especially is a great place for a new player to begin to experience the game. Strikes are a linear combat experience with a number of different difficulty levels. You can get a good feel for the types of combat scenarios you'll find yourself in during most activities in the game inside of a strike. You could test out new weapons, exotics, and builds in a fairly low stakes and relaxed game mode. And of course, as a player becomes more familiar with the game, they can move up the difficulty ladder to challenge themselves further. The same can be said about seasonal activities too, but there is a small difference. Seasonal activities such as Onslaught or Tomb of Elders have additional wrinkles and or mechanics that players need to interact with. While not necessarily being more difficult combat-wise compared to strikes, the added mechanical complexity can give players a different experience than a strike would. In addition, seasonal activities tend to be a bit more varied in gameplay, while strikes are always linear. Both types of playlists are also a source of decent loot. Strikes will provide a good starting point for new players, with at least 1 or 2 weapons each season being worth chasing. Seasonal activities are usually where the better loot is, and the loot is almost always craftable here, except, I guess, in Revenant. A number of seasonal weapons over the years have been nearly best in slot, again, except maybe during Revenant. Sometimes a single season will have multiple weapons worthy of slotting into your loadout, such as during Echoes with Aberrant Action and Lost Signal. For anyone not interested in doing endgame content such as dungeons and raids, the loot and seasonal playlists are probably going to be the best that you can get. Although these activities achieve their main goals, there are a couple issues. The biggest assumption I made before was that these activities standalone were compelling enough to play over and over. And to be honest, that just isn't the case right now. For a player who is new to the game, these activities are probably fine as they are. There's a lot of different strikes, and there's a decent number of varied seasonal activities to play as well, all of which will be fresh for a brand new player. For more veteran players, these activities are almost never worth playing. Let's start with content variety. Like I just said, strikes are a fairly diverse activity with anywhere from 7 to 10 unique strikes available per season. But once you play each strike, especially if you play them on repeat, you come to realize that there is zero variation in any of them. Once you've played the Corrupted 37 times, you know exactly what to expect and when. On lower difficulty strikes, this also means that you can just blast through the content without really thinking about it at all. For veteran players, I would say that turning your brain off completely for 10 minutes is boring at best and a waste of time at worst. In higher level strikes such as Master or Grandmaster Nightfalls, the same is true, except the difficulty is of course a little higher. Each time you load into the strike, no matter the difficulty, it is the same exact experience. If you solve it once, you never have to solve it again. For new players, this also presents a bit of an issue. If a new player loads into a Vanguard op for the first time, there is a high chance they will be teamed up with a veteran player. The new player is most likely just trying to experience the game for the first time, but the veteran is trying to clear the activity as quickly as possible. The result is the veteran player rushing ahead, pulling the poor new light along without giving them a chance to really sink their teeth into the gameplay. Although strikes are a linear activity, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to feel linear. Strikes are always a straight line, combat arena to combat arena, ending with a boss fight. Every time you play, it's the same path, the same enemies, and the same boss. I think this is the problem with the feel of strikes. But what if we took a different approach? Maybe a way to shake up the linearity of strikes is to make small changes with each run. Maybe some of the enemy groups could be slightly different. Maybe there could be branching paths that are either open or closed depending on certain factors. Maybe there could even be random events that could spawn in a strike, such as a rare enemy that drops special loot. Think the Treasure Thrall from Riven's Lair, or from the Warlord's Ruin dungeon. Or maybe even the Butcher in Diablo. All of these are, of course, just ideas, but the point here is that strikes don't have to feel linear even if they technically are a, well, linear experience. Even an activity like Onslaught is a great example of this kind of variety. When you load into Onslaught, you know you'll be on X map with Y enemies, but the type of waves, the random tormentors or subjugators, the random bonus objectives, and the random boss encounters make the mode exciting. Sure, it's the same activity every time, but each run is a little different from one another, making it much more replayable from a gameplay-only standpoint. Seasonal activities are a bit more replayable, but not so much so. Tomb of the Elders and Breach Executable are examples of this. Each run is a little different, with both bringing players to slightly different arenas with slightly different objectives and or modifiers each time. The problem with these activities when compared to something like Onslaught is that there are fewer variations, and the actual gameplay is much less interesting. For both Breach Executable and Tomb of Elders, each encounter is a combat arena, sometimes with a bonus objective such as destroying generators or collecting fluxes of darkness. There is not much variety outside of this, making these activities feel very samey on each run. Like I said before, Onslaught solved this issue by having a wide variety of waves and events that could take place to spice up the gameplay each time you play. What might arguably be more important for actually getting players to play is the reward for completing the activities. All activities in Destiny, regardless of PvE, PvP, endgame, etc., all drop loot upon completion of the activity. The same is of course true for the core activities we're talking about today. Sometimes the reward structure is slightly different with an activity such as Riven's Lair, or more recently, Onslaught or Tomb of Elders granting rewards during the activity after reaching a certain threshold. Regardless, loot is the reward for playing. Since this is the case, players should expect the reward to be worth the time investment of playing. Now, I'm going to have a whole nother video for a deep dive into loot, so I won't get too in depth here, But if I'm being honest, the loot that has been available inside these core activities is not great. Or rather, it's just not exciting enough. The loot obtained from a source such as a strike is good enough for a newer player or a player who isn't looking for the best of the best, but falls short when it's given to a player who is searching for better and better gear. In comparison, endgame loot such as weapons found in raids are much more compelling for players. Typically, the perk pools are better, and the weapon at a baseline is usually a bit stronger too. Whether that's because of the raid-specific origin trait or otherwise, I'll kind of explain the differences more with a real example. There are two major arc waveframe GLs currently available in the game, Undercurrent and Forbearance. For clarity, and to keep the video a bit shorter, I'm only talking about Forbearance from Vow of the Disciple, not from the Brave Arsenal. Regardless, Undercurrent is exclusive to Strikes and Nightfalls, while Forbearance is found in, well, the Vow of Disciple raid. Both weapons fit into the same use case. Both weapons have solid perks. But you might have noticed that people tend to stick to using only one of these weapons. And that crown goes to Forbearance. But why? Functionally, they are both almost identical. The real reason I think Forbearance won is simply because of coming first. And also, I guess, because it's craftable. I would assume that the majority of endgame or veteran players already have a Forbearance god roll, whether they received it via random drop or via crafting. When the Undercurrent was released, players probably didn't care too much since there was no real reason to switch to it from the weapon they were already using. The other key component is crafting. Raiders who found 5 red borders could just craft a perfect weapon. Undercurrent is only available with random rolls, making it a bit less appealing since you could get the roll you want on the first drop, but more often than not, you'll be running the strike over and over, hoping for a perfect drop at the end at random. All this was to say that strike weapons in general are not usually that compelling when compared to other available weapons. It's just because those competing weapons either A, came first, B, were easier to come by, or C, were just plain better. There's other examples, of course, but you get the idea. Strike loot just isn't enough of a reward on its own when compared to other activities that drop the same or better loot. Now let's talk about the problem with seasonal activities especially. Seasonal or episodic content is usually shorter or more condensed activities, which revolve around the theme of the current season. Seasonal activities have a number of issues. First off, let's talk about the content itself. How does each activity feel to play? What I personally have noticed about the least popular seasonal activities is that they are very close to being reused, or they're just previously seen content, as opposed to brand new content. The battlegrounds we got in episode Echoes were actually solid, but they were battlegrounds. We've seen battlegrounds many times before, and these are no different. It's basically a strike with added steps. Onslaught from Revenant is just more Onslaught. Tomb of Elders, in my opinion, is also just a rehash of Catch Crash from Season of Plunder. Other activities, such as Salvage from Season of the Deep, or Breach Executable from Echoes, are a series of battle arenas in a location we have been to before. Breach Executable takes us to the Nessus Patrol Zone, and Salvage brought us to the former Titan Patrol Zone. In either case, the activity was a simple addition of basic enemy combat encounters on top of an existing area. It didn't add much that was new in terms of gameplay outside of a couple carry the thing here type mechanics, and overall, seasonal activities kind of just feel like quickly put together content drops that are not meant to do much else besides be a vector for dropping loot or quest completions. And that's actually the other issue with seasonal content. It's only meant to stick around for at most a single year, or at least 3 to 4 months, minimum. This means that the designs of seasonal activities are typically not made in a way to stand the test of time. If you know that the content is going to be removed, there's no reason to spend additional resources to create that content. It's no wonder that a majority of seasonal activities feel bland or rehashed. It's because, well, they are. In contrast, a strike, a dungeon, or a raid is built with the intention of being replayed over and over. These activities, probably, will never be removed from the game. So extra time and care is put into the design and development to ensure it has sticking power. Being scrappy means that developers could put together new content quickly for a season, but it also means that it won't have the same attention to detail as with evergreen content. It also means that the content itself is difficult to replay over and over. If the activity is bland or samey, players just won't want to interact with it. And forcing players to interact with the content that they don't want to is a great way to quickly burn someone out from playing the game. There are some seasonal activities that genuinely felt new and unique though. The most recent example is Riven's Lair. Activities like this are built as a testing ground for new ideas and mechanics that have not been incorporated into the game as a whole yet. Riven's Lair played with the idea of an almost roguelike experience, with difficulty scaling based on your performance in the activity. It also tested variations in the length of the activity based on how long a fire team wants to play the activity for. Seasonal activities are the perfect testing ground for these kinds of novel concepts, since if it's bad, it could just be removed eventually, and if it's good, the developers could bring these ideas forward to future content. Seasonal activities are a double-edged sword. The temporary nature of them makes them a breeding ground for some of the most unique types of content, but also for the most bland. Core PvE activities are just that. The core activities a player should expect to be playing when they log into Destiny 2. It should be a set of content that's evergreen, easy to pick up, easy to play, and worth playing. The current state of core activities in Destiny is not exactly that. Specifically, making these activities worth playing is the #1 problem facing them. And that is a fairly big ask. Replayability and loot drops are the two biggest categories under this umbrella. Good loot is the first step to get players to have an interest in engaging with an activity, since that is the ultimate reward for playing. But once a player is actually inside an activity, it should be worth playing in a vacuum, without thinking about the end reward. Linear content like a strike or a battleground should have some type of variance to keep things fresh each run, and not just a variance in overall difficulty. Seasonal or otherwise temporary content should be built without too much consideration for the fact that it is in fact temporary. If seasonal content is held to almost the same high standard of gameplay as evergreen content like raids or dungeons, then I can guarantee that the resulting activities will be so much more engaging to play. And finally, combining everything together will make the core playlist so much more interesting, rewarding, and above all else, fun. After all, if the core activities in the game are boring, why would anyone want to check out the rest of the game? So, what do you think? Are core PvE activities in Destiny good enough as is? Do you agree that there needs to be some kind of a refresh? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below or over in our Discord server linked in the video description. And by the way, just like last time, there's a poll available right now on the post tab of my channel where you can vote on the topic for the next State of Destiny deep dive. Nearly 250 people voted last time, and I think we might be able to double it this time, so get over there and vote. Oh, and if you want to see that video when it drops, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And maybe even leave a like if you liked what I had to say today. But I think that's all I've got for now. As always, I've been Rizeki, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.